So welcome to Hacking Business Technology, podcast about IT and getting your business to think outside the box, etc. You know, I didn't say our website last time, so I feel obligated to say it right away. It's hackbiztech.com. You can actually type it out too if you want, hackingbusinesstech.com. Those both work. So I'm joined again by our lovely co-hosts, Farah Rantula, Mark Kawasaki, Matt Hooper, and our guest today is Mr. Michael Cote. Welcome.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
And Michael's from 451 Research. So we sort of are doing back-to-back analysts. We feel like, okay, we got checkbox, checkbox, checkbox. We're starting up a podcast. We need to see this company, that company.
I love the fact that we are bringing people in who know what they're talking about, though. Here, this is what's important about this podcast.
Okay, cool. So, do you have any questions today?
I do. Good to see you again, Cote.
Hello.
Hey, so my question is straight up about you, right? You're with Red Monk, analyst, who is just really respected. All these things going on. You end up in a very large company with a very unique role. Now you're back to being an analyst. Talk to us about that. What was all about that, and then we'll get into the beer.
Sure. So how long is this podcast? We have 8 hours at our disposal. So yeah, the last time that I was on one of y'all's podcasts, you asked a similar question, or I think it was Matt, Matt, the other Matt, which was, so if I wanted to be an analyst, like, what's some advice you would give to do that, right? And I don't know why I'm interpreting this question that way, but it's sort of like, so why'd you go work at a big weird company, and what was that like? And now you're an analyst again, and if give us some guidance on what it's like being crazy with your career. So, yeah, I mean, so I to sort of recap, I ended up being a Red Monk analyst because I was working at BMC Software at the time as a developer, and I would get bored. And such is the enterprise software developer's life that you can just blow off and goof off for a day, and I would write up posts and just write things and have podcasts, and I got discovered, if you will, by the people at Red Monk, and then I asked them about switching jobs, and they offered me a job, and that seemed nice. So, shiny object syndrome. So that's how I ended up doing that. And then I left Red Monk in 2011 because I traveled a lot, and I had a family, and I had an interesting job opportunity, so it was just a nicer thing for my family, essentially. And luckily, it turned out to be a very educational job. I mean, I like to joke that I had a very narrow 2-year MBA program, because what I did there is I worked in corporate strategy, starting up the software group and doing M&A. And that's a very, for someone with my background, who has a philosophy degree and just fell into being a programmer, you don't really get to work on multi-billion-dollar acquisitions that often. So, one way of snarkily putting it is that I ended up finally working with people that I had been trying to avoid all of my life, right? Like, basically the people who ended up going to B school and were very high pressure and used lots of dry cleaners. And I got to use Excel really well, and PowerPoint. I mean, and these are all tracers and tools, but the point was, I got to work in the core of the business, right, and really understand how a $68 billion company functions and thinks, and it was great, right? You can read about what it's like to work at a startup and what it's like to be somewhat acquired, but you very rarely get to read about what it's like working in a giant company that isn't really cynical and dark. So it was very educational, and I can only take so much education. So I left after 2 years when I had a chance to go back and work at an analyst firm. And once again, mastermind of my own career that I am, I just sort of fell into to this job when I ran into the person who had previously had my position, Rachel Chalmers, and we were talking, and she was saying they were hiring, and there you go. I ended up taking this job to go back and be an analyst. But it's pretty much doing it. This is a different type of firm that I'm at now. Than Red Monk was. We've got about 300 people at 451 Research, and we've got a much diverse client base than we had at Red Monk. And I have to manage. I have the pleasure of managing 3 other analysts on my team and managing a practice. So it's interesting to sort of be in a different part of the analyst world, with the clients that we have, and worrying about doing more than just taking care of myself, if you will. So hopefully that addresses the question that I made up in place of whatever it is you asked.
Well, it says to me that analysts can have fun too, right? Because you're
Yeah.
practicing this, and that you're in a position now actually to probably give better insight, opinion, and exposure to things because of your experiences, right?
Yeah, no, and to that end, I mean, there is another thing I would add to be less snarky about answering your question. Like, I think one of the things I missed when I was at Dell working in strategy and M&A is I really missed like just talking to people. like literally and metaphorically, you're kind of like stuck in Round Rock, right? Like you talk with Round Rock people all the time, and there's when you're like, hey, I work on acquiring companies for Dell, like people want to talk to you, but it's sort of like in a very non-human way, right? Like they just want to hustle you and get them to buy their company, which is like not fun. It can be informative. They'll show you they'll open their kimono way deep, which is if you like looking at bones, it's good. But like, yeah, but it's nice now that I'm an analyst. Like I just get to like go talk with anyone, and I don't really have an agenda. And people are also happy to just talk with me. I don't know. I miss that quite a bit.
Nice.
So what's your area of focus in your research now, Michael?
So I head up the practice that's called infrastructure software. Some longtime 451 people may know it as ICE, which is infrastructure computing in enterprise. Anyways, so what we focus on, there's a couple of ways to think about it. We focus on systems management and application development and cloud software, and then miscellaneous things like virtual desktops and all that nonsense. And so I think for you guys in this crowd, that's probably pretty straightforward. But another way of thinking about it, excuse me, is we focus on not public cloud, right? Like, so there are other groups who focus on public cloud in itself, like they cover AWS and Rackspace and like Verizon and running things in a public cloud context. And they also will cover like OpenStack, but we cover OpenStack not in the sense of Rackspace running it, but OpenStack as in companies wanting to run it on their own, right? So true to the name of infrastructure software, the emphasis is on software, right? Okay. So wherever there may be software involved, that's kind of where we poke our head in. And then also to tell you what we do by telling you what we don't do, we don't focus on security because there's a whole other group that does that. We don't focus on databases and big data and BI because there's a whole other group that does that. And so we're kind of like the everything else bucket when it comes to infrastructure software.
So the whole idea of private cloud then always rubs me the wrong way. I just feel like it's a stopgap measure that will be non-existent in 5 to 10 years. Do you agree with that? I mean, is there any point to a permanent long-term private cloud that we can't overcome when the larger public cloud companies offer all the compliance we need? And I mean, is there really a point in keeping things in our little house when they've got a fortress right over there?
Sure. Well, one of the benefits of a liberal arts education, to answer your question,
okay, hour two,
is don't worry, it'll actually answer your question. But unless you can learn to hold 2 or more opposing ideas in your head at once, you're never going to make more than a C in college. So I was well trained to do that. So as you can imagine, I have multiple conflicting ideas about that. So first of all, I agree completely with you, right? Like this is one of the as you can imagine, in working on cloud strategy, as I did when I was at Dell, it would drive me crazy, right? Because of course Dell wants to sell more on-premise stuff. So you're trying to figure out like stopping the onslaught of public cloud. But yeah, no, I mean, with the developer background that I have, like intellectually and maybe even architecturally, I don't understand why I would want to run all of my own stuff. And I feel like those other guys could probably run it just fine. And usually when I've had to implement something that was enterprise grade, is there cursing on this podcast, or is it like?
I'll bleep it out afterwards.
Anyways, whenever I had to introduce something that was enterprise grade, it was a bunch of BS, right? So it's sort of like, and then security is what it is. It's like it's either secure or not, and like whether or not like I've left a bunch of backup tapes in the back of my Chevy, or like I've got the heartbleed thing, like crap's gonna happen, right? Like. So essentially, through a reductio ad absurdum, if that's the right Latin or French or whatever, like I don't really know why private cloud needs to exist. Like that seems silly, especially looking out in the future. Now, on the other hand, the to be schizophrenic liberal artsy guy, right? Like it's pretty obvious from our surveys and the surveys from all other analyst shops that I used to read a lot when I was at Dell, that the buyers want private cloud, like in a bad way, or at least, to be overly nuanced, they say they want private cloud, right?
Okay.
And supposedly you're supposed to listen to your customers. That's something I've heard. So the buying people really want private cloud. And then it gets into this realm of nuance, right? So like if you look at ServiceNow's architecture, it's kind of like a private cloud. It's like a single tenant managed hosted, sort of not really, I don't know, cloud. I kind of bastardize it, but the way they run it is not like a classic multi-tenant cloud. And a lot like Workday and Salesforce, like a lot of the SaaSes out there, especially the older ones, they don't, it's not like they're running in a multi-tenant chatty neighbor, noisy neighbor like situation. Like they run in a much different way. So if, to rephrase your question, isn't what you want really managed hosting? Right? Yeah. Then that becomes much more of a fruitful consensus building, middle of the aisle kind of way of putting it, right? Like you know, I was at a think tank that Dell put on. It's like that. You need to get Dell to sponsor this podcast or whatever. Like back in January, and the Safeway CIO was sitting next to me, and he was like, "Well," he didn't actually talk like that. But he was actually a great guy. And, you know, he's like, "Well, I don't ever want to build a data center again. It's like stupid, right? Like, you know, it costs all this money, and like we had this one data. This is all on tape, so I feel fine quoting it. Like we had this one data center, and someone forgot to like do maintenance on the ACs." And so the HVACs leaked everywhere, and we looked at the price for rebuilding the data center, and it was just stupid. So now we colo, right? Now we have managed hosting, and the American Cancer CIO agreed with him, and like all these guys and all these people, guys and gals, like for their existing brownfield stuff, the economics just kind of sort of don't make sense to just like move it. But when most of them look forward, they're like, I don't want to build a data center. Are you insane? Right? Like they don't want that. So I think what they want is like managed hosting, essentially, that's run in a cloud-oriented fashion. And then finally, to top it off, like I like to use this analog in our surveys. When you ask people who haven't used cloud, what's your number one concern about cloud? They all say security. They're like, oh my God, is it secure? And then you ask someone who's used cloud for like, I don't know what the term is, 6 to 12 months, and security is like the number 5, 6 concern. And I have a feeling a lot of the cloud FUD is like that. Like you're worried about this, you're worried about that, and then they actually try it and they're just fine.
Yeah. And a lot of things I hear people talking about with private cloud is really just being agile in a way that they should have been all along anyways. I mean, they want to be able to deploy on demand and automate things, but I mean those are just methods. That's not necessarily cloud at all. So.
Sure. Yep.
So the new philosophical question would be, what is cloud? So
I think we've been asking that question for a long time.
So you spoke at the OpenStack Summit in Atlanta, and this kind of might be a good segue into it. So I love this notion of this formula of IT minus SaaS equals what? Question mark?
Yeah.
So could you elaborate a little bit about that and talk about your ideas there? I mean, definitely in championing application development and really focusing in on that, but would like to hear your thoughts and some... Sure.
Well, great. Well, I appreciate you trying to promote my cheesy meme. That's just how I'm going to make my millions. Anyways, yeah. So just to go over it, like the walk that I have to that, so to speak. See, there's another term you learn when you work with all the iBankers. You're always walking to things. It's sort of like the showing your work. See, these are skills you can learn. Anyways, essentially, so like following on that cloud conversation, you're like, oh, so if everything's going to move to cloud, like then what, right? And the first question is like, well, who is the person asking this question? You have and let's segment it down to end users, vendors, and maybe investors. Investors can take care of themselves while they screw us all over, so we won't worry about them. But you know, essentially, if you're an end user or a vendor. So if you're an end user, the question becomes, so if I'm not like babysitting my ERP install and my SharePoint, if I don't have all these pets, to use the pets versus cattle metaphor, and instead, like I'm more operationally efficient with my time and my money, in theory. Like either I can fire all those people when I go over from an on-premise SAP to like a Salesforce, and you know, happy day for that. Or I could reallocate those resources to doing something interesting with them. And I think what if you're not managing on-premise packaged software, then you're basically just managing, as the IT department, the relationships you have with SaaSes and customizing SaaSes. So that might be kind of a boondoggle. It might be the same amount of work, but let's assume it's better. Like all the work you put into customizing Salesforce and Service and have you is less than the work you put into customizing on-premise packaged software. We'll make that core assumption. Then you're basically managing your network connection, desktops, legacy IT you haven't gotten rid of, and a bunch of boring stuff that hopefully takes up less time. Yeah, exactly. And you're having your all hands meeting, so you're working on those slides of people leaning over their desk, pointing at computer screens. It takes a lot of time to make those. And then I think what's left over is you have time to do basically custom software development, right? So you have time to do things like, people love citing Uber, right? Or the Starbucks app, or a web application that sort of like interacts with your market and your customers in a different, new, novel way, right?
Twitter.
And yeah. I guess so. Yeah. But I mean, you have to think of like if you're a non-technology company, there's probably lots of things you could get a team of programmers to do to make the way you conduct business in the world better, right? And I overuse the Starbucks example just because I use it all the time when I'm traveling. That like it used to be I'd have to pay in cash, but there was a team of developers that Starbucks got, or maybe they outsourced it, and they made this little mobile app that I just hold my phone up to this funny analog loophole and I can pay with it, and it's like a loyalty card and it's interesting and novel. And now I'm talking about Starbucks, right? And so again, that was a team of developers who did that, and I have a feeling that lots of different businesses, if they had the resources to get some developers, that would be useful. So that's part of what's left over. Now, if you're a vendor and you've been making lots of your money based on the sale of packaged software, right? Because I would assume that most of IT spend is driven by packaged software, again, or desktops, right? So you either spend money on desktop OSs, your networking gear, maybe your archiving, but a tremendous amount is like, well, we're going to need an ERP system, right? And then the $1 that you spend on your Oracle, SAP, Lawson, and Infor, whatever. I guess Infor is like hybrid now, but like there's probably going to be $5 to $15 spent on everything else, right? Like that one piece of software drives lots of spend. And so as a vendor, if basically we're cutting out the on-premise sort of market, then you're kind of like, oh crap, what do I sell, right? Because like you could sell to the SaaSes of the world, but anyone who's read a little bit of Michael Porter knows that if you've got a smaller buyer base, you're screwed, right? Like that's why the server business is bad, because the hyperscale buyers like command such a price premium that like they remove the margin from buying servers. So you could sell to SaaSes, but that's difficult. Or you could become a SaaS yourself, so that's interesting. You could do that. Or I think the other thing that's left over is basically selling into that need to write custom software development or other customized things like, I think business intelligence and analytics and big data, like that still requires a tremendous amount of customizing, no matter what cloud or on-premise things it's running on. So you could sell to that quite a bit. So I don't know. I mean, being a former developer, the answer to me is always development. But like that's kind of the walk from IT minus SaaS equals what to the what being basically like custom IT.
Which is really great. I think it ties well into our first podcast last week when we were talking about people, always talking about fire prevention or creating a culture of innovation.
Right.
And this is exactly it, right? Is to create a culture of innovation, you have to create space for it. So let go of that managed hosting, let go of that stuff, and see, bring in new skill sets and focus on development, solve problems.
Yeah, that makes absolutely.
So as a former M&A expert, what do you assume, or what can we learn from Rackspace today?
That they're like shopping themselves around?
Yeah, that's strange. Like, I don't understand. I just want to understand the politics of this, because it looks, from a consumer standpoint, it either looks desperate or brilliant. Like, I need to know what this means.
Sure. All right.
Also, you have to do a shot every 5 minutes, and then we'll see what the answer changes.
So, okay. So Rackspace is in a situation where they are, while they're sort of like the number 2 in cloud, they're very small relative to their competitors and the milieu, if that's right, that they operate in. Like, you know, the Jack Clark over at the Register, he has this great chart he throws up any chance he get, and it's sort of, I think it goes back to, like, I don't know, several years, and it's the amount of money various clouds have spent building their clouds, right? And it's just like in the billions and billions, astronomical. And if you look, Rackspace is typically, it has like Azure, Google, Amazon, maybe some other people, and Rackspace is always the smallest bar on there. So you're like, great, I'm asleep now. You just told me about a chart. But what that chart tells you is that Rackspace has the least amount of money to spend on cloud, right? That all these other people, and never mind the profits or anything like that, at this point in cloud, like, it's all about spending billions of dollars to build a cloud, and that kind of maniacal, not making a profit way that drives the world crazy. But I mean, that's the situation that Rackspace is in, is that it's really expensive to meet the demand for cloud. Like, you have to, like, the cost shifts onto the cloud provider, right? For the end user, it's fine. Like, you like it. You don't have to spend lots of money all up front, but someone is left holding that bag of stuff, to be all PG. So that's their issue, is, like, I think at the core, they just need capital, right? And I think if you look at the carefully worded, like, SEC filing, it says, we're seeking an acquirer or an investor. Right? So what they need is cash. Like, not necessarily, they don't need to be acquired only. You could get your cash through investment. And I think, as an analog, if you look at SoftLayer, which was acquired by IBM last year, so SoftLayer was smaller than Rackspace, but was also a cloud, and seemingly successful, if you will, by nature of being acquired and having good references and things like that. And they used to be, there's a bunch of people who came from The Planet, which was a hosting company, and then they got, like, I forget how much, but they got a lot of money from a PE firm. I think it was one that starts with G and has 3 more letters after it. So they basically got a bunch of PE money, like hundreds of millions of dollars, and then they went and bought The Planet. So they had cash. Like, they had cash to do a controlled build out, and they were also private, which removes the problems of being public. Right. But they basically ran their business in a way that, like, the cash that they had coming in would meet the curve of servers they would need to buy. And I think Rackspace's problem is, like, managing that curve is really hard, especially when you're a public company that's expected to grow every quarter, right? Like, whereas SoftLayer, like, because they were private, they didn't have to grow every quarter. Like, they could grow to instead meet an exit date, right? Instead of meeting a quarterly call, which are very different dynamics.
Wow, that's a great story.
Yeah, I'm not as educated in the dynamics of their financial situation, but do you think this has anything to do with it that I look culturally, we are in a self-service world, and I look at, like, Amazon support is non-existent. Everything pretty much is self-service. Rackspace's mission was, you know, we're fanatical about support, but that came at a cost, right?
Yeah. So yes, no, that is without getting too snarky about it. I mean, that is.
You can get snarky, Code.
That is a potential problem Rackspace has. So let's put it this way: Rackspace has made a strategic bet about cloud, right? And their bet is that there is plenty of room in the market for fanatical support. Whereas, you know, if you whack down the question mark part of your question into a statement, the statement is the cloud doesn't want fanatical support, right? And so Rackspace would care to disagree, and that's what a lot of their marketing and positioning is around, is that, like, you actually do want to call someone, right? So yeah, I mean, I don't know the answer, and it's a bet at this point. Like, that's a good question. Like, how much support do people need? Now, back to the discussion we had earlier, if what the mainstream market actually wants is managed hosting, then they're in a really good position, right? Yeah. And then they just need to learn how to service that and, like, get some buddies that help them out. But if it turns out that what the market wants is, like, faceless, headless Amazon, then sure.
Mm-hmm. And that's Hacking Business Technology, Episode 2. Thank you, Cote, for being our guest. Thank you, hosts, for being here. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everybody.